You might also get a question regarding equality or comparison inside JavaScript. And as you can see here, we have a question: design a shallow comparison function. And for this, you must know the difference of JavaScript comparison, which is native, shallow comparison, and deep comparison. So inside JavaScript, we can simply write 1 equals 2, we're getting false, 1 equals 1 is true. This is working because we're comparing primitives. But if we will compare here a equals 1, and here is an object a equals 1, we're getting false. Why is that? Because we can't compare objects like this in JavaScript because they are referencing different objects inside memory. And you have exactly the same problem with array. Empty array does not equal empty array. And yes, we can understand why it is working like this, but it is not comfortable because normally developers want to compare arrays and objects by values and not like reference to the object in the memory. This is why we have shallow comparison and deep comparison functions. So the idea is that shallow comparison is faster than deep comparison, but it will fix problems with comparing objects or arrays. It will fix only not nested arrays or objects, which actually means if we will with shallow comparison compare A, and here we have an object with B1, and here B1, we will still get wrong answer, even with shallow comparison function. And this is completely normal because in this case, we want to compare every single value nested, and then we must use deep comparison. And deep comparison is extremely slow because we are checking every single value, but it will for sure give you a true answer. So in this video we must write a shallow comparison function, which means we want to fix comparing of arrays and objects, but we must not compare nested arrays and objects. This is how shallow comparison is working. And actually here I have an additional function type of, which will help us tremendously in building shallow comparison. And as you can see in browser, we can simply use type of on different type of data. For example, for number we are getting string number, for string we're obviously getting a string, and here we can write an object and then we're getting object, which actually means it is really nice to get the type of our variable as a string. And for us the most interesting part is this object prototype to string call input, and as you can see in input we are writing for example 1 and we are getting object number. And actually this regular expression here will simply remove object and we will get this part with number. This is how this function is working. So here I want to create our shallow compare function, and we must provide here two arguments. So we have source and target, and these are two things that we want to compare, for example, to variables. And first of all, we want to compare a data type, because if we have a different data type, then we should not do anything, and it means that they are not equal. This is why we can write here if type of source does not equal type of, then here we can simply return false. This is why it is super performant. We don't compare anything, we simply get a type, compare them, and we're out. After this, we must write logic for our primitives, and here we can simply use plain native JavaScript comparison. So I'm writing here if source equals with 3 equals target, then here we're just returning, which actually means this single liner will compare all primitives. And now we just need to build cases for our objects and arrays. First of all, let's cover our arrays, and here we want to check type of our source equals array, then we want to apply this logic. And you might ask, okay, but why we're just checking source and not a target? Because actually here on the top, we already know that both source and target are of the same type. In other case, we are already out of the function. So here we know that source and target are both arrays, and now we want to compare them. But actually we can make some performance improvement. So here we can compare just a length of two arrays, and if they are different, then we should not compare anything, because they are not equal. So here I can write if source length does not equal our target length, then we're out. So here simply return false. Now we want to compare these two arrays, and the easiest way to do it is to use every. So we're checking every single element inside an array and compare it. So here I want to write return source every, so we're checking every single element of the source, and here we have access to element and index. And what we can write here is our element equals target index. In this case, we are comparing every single element of our source with every single element of the target. But as you can see here, we are using native JavaScript comparison, which means it will work for primitives, but it won't work, for example, for objects or arrays. How does it look like? Let's reload the page and write here our function shallow_compare, and we can provide now array with primitives. So here we have 1 and 1, and we are getting true, which actually means our function is working correctly, because in native JavaScript you can't compare 1 and 1, it will be false, and our function is working correctly. Now we must write the similar code for our object. This is why here we can write if type of source equals object, then we want to apply our logic. And again, I want to improve performance. This is why here, first of all, we can check, for example, object keys and compare the length of the keys. If the length is different, then these objects are for sure different. So here we can write object.keys, here we have source, and we are comparing the length. So here length does not equal our object.keys, and here we have our target.length. In this case, we can simply return false, and we should not do any comparison. And actually here now we need to compare objects, so for this I will also use every. So here I want to return object.keys, and I'm getting an array of strings of keys of our object, and here we are providing our source. After this we can use every, and here as in every single element we are getting our key. And now we can compare source key, so we are getting the value, and we compare here target key. In this case, we are comparing every single value of our object, but as you can see with plain JavaScript comparison, which means it will work for primitives, but it won't work for deep nested elements. Let's check this out. I will reload the page. Here is our shallow compare, but in this case, we want to compare object A1 and object A1. And as you can see here, I have some typo, so here is not source. Let's change this. Now as you can see it is working and we can compare our objects. And actually now I want one more comparison for dates, and this is extremely easy to do. So here we can write type of source equals date, then we want to compare just two numbers, because actually we can compare every date to milliseconds, and compare numbers is extremely efficient. This is why here we can write return source.getTime, this will get milliseconds, equals target.getTime. And in this case we are simply comparing two numbers, and this is totally fine. So this is how we are building shallow comparison function, and actually this is how I want to see comparison by default in JavaScript, but unfortunately we don't have it. This is why we must build this function on our own or use it from some library like Lambda, Lodash, or just npm package. And if you're answering such question about shallow comparison, you must say that it is super performant in comparison to deep comparison, but it can't compare nested elements, which is totally fine, and you just need to know for what case you are using it.